Oh, so at least. I know you're alive. So I mean, I know you're alive. Okay.
Good evening, everyone, here at Rudolf Steiner branch in Chicago and online. We're so excited to have all of you joining us tonight. I'm Mary Spalding. I'm currently serving as president of the council here at the branch. And we are delighted to have the opportunity to host the inaugural exhibit of the Karl König traveling tour of the calendar of the soul drawings. And I'm going to have Deborah Grace, who is the administrator for North America for this exhibit. She's going to come and introduce our speaker tonight. I would ask everyone here to make sure you turn off your cell phones. And I hope that everyone will help support this exhibit and the branch hosting this tour by making a contribution to Rudolf Steiner branch, rschicago.org. And thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. So Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for coming. It was so nice to meet almost everyone this evening. And I have to say genuinely, what a wonderful group of people. Just lovely. And I particularly want to thank and acknowledge Mary, who was one of the first people to say, yes, we'd like to have the exhibition, and actually had the vision to say, no, not just a weekend, we want to have a longer period of time. And it's been so great to work with Mary that I said, I wish you could help me organize all the exhibitions. So what a wonderful resource. Thank you, Mary. And welcome also to everyone who's here online. Thank you all for your interest. I am honored to introduce my colleague and friend, Richard Steele, who is the founder and CEO of the Karl König Institute. I guess a bit of common background we have is that we both came to Camphill in our young 20s. Richard to Fernbühl in Germany, and me to place called Camphill Village, Koenig in upstate New York, and have pretty much been connected in one way or another since then. So Richard is I have to embarrass him. He's English, and it's just really nice to be able to embarrass him. He's just really a phenomenal human being, and I'm so glad that you all get the opportunity to experience what he is bringing. And I will say that my experience is that when Richard met these drawings of Karl König's 50 some years ago, yeah, it was 1972, and he had just come to Camphill, a young man. It made such a deep impression on him that the following 5 decades of his life, part of what he's done is to go deeper and deeper in devotion to what is this inner journey that Rudolf Steiner brought with the calendar of the soul, which he called a path of feeling, and that Karl König opened up with these 52 doorways into this inner landscape of the inner journey. And what Richard has gained in those 5 decades of working in that way began to be something that people were saying, could you make this available somehow? So in March of 2022, Richard started a series of online talks. It was during the time of COVID, on the calendar of the soul. So 52 talks, they're still available. One for each verse Rudolf Steiner gave, seen through the lens of each drawing that Karl König made for that. verse. And this talk series grew in the course of the year to be about 500 people. And it was translated weekly into Chinese and is being translated into Italian, and he's now doing it in German. And I think the comments I get from people is that it's been such a heart-opening experience of the Calendar of the Soul, which for me, frankly, after 50 years was still more enigmatic than I would like to admit. But I really didn't understand that it was a path of the heart, and that's something that Richard could really bring. And in doing this talk series, he also realized, being aware of the reality that Rudolf Steiner translated the Calendar of the Soul verses out of the Spirit, that how they were translated into English was asking him to create a translation. So there's now a new translation of Richard's the Calendar of the Soul verses in English. And if you have any questions about any of this, the talk series or the books are all downstairs, will be around. And the exhibitions of the Calendar of the Soul, Richard has been doing for, I don't know how many years, probably since 2011 or something, but about 30 times in Europe and Great Britain and Scandinavia. And this is the first time they've been to North America. And we're coming in a pretty committed way. We have about 14 exhibitions scheduled between now, this inaugural one, and November of 2024. So it's exciting times for us, and it's so wonderful to be able to start this journey here with all of you. I've never been to Chicago, and I wouldn't have guessed that it's just the warmest, kindest group of people, but you all are. And so thank you for your interest, and I know you'll be inspired by what Richard is going to begin sharing tonight. Richard.
Deborah, thank you for embarrassing me already. So now we're going to try and live up to what you said, right? Yeah, but I'm very pleased to be here in Chicago, and that the exhibitions can start here. It must mean something, right? That's
The heartland.
Very special. I guess so. Yeah, indeed. So, Deborah, would you like to? Thank you. I actually want to tell you a bit this evening about the origins of the Calendar of the Soul too, because that does make a difference for the way we approach them today. Where did they originate? What was the background to it? And I'm sure there's a lot of this you will know about already. Okay. Thank you.
All the way.
Oh, thanks. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about that, and I've brought some things from the archive too, and that's quite exciting. So you'll be the first people to see what I've brought here. I'm not telling you what it is. So if we go back to the question, where did the Calendar of the Soul really originate? Then I think it's important to go back in history to the time of 1910, because that was a time, a whole year, when Rudolf Steiner did the biggest journeys he ever did, to Scandinavia, down to Sicily, Palermo, which is the most southerly point he ever went to. And between all these, all the places he went to between these two places, he spoke about something very particular. He spoke about the new appearance of the Christ being in our time, the Christ being in the etheric. And you can really, if you look at all the lectures he gave in this time, you can really be surprised why all this had to pour out at the stage of history. what was happening in 1910? Well, yes, it was Halley's Comet, of course, that was one thing that he also spoke about. But the other thing was probably not so conscious for a lot of people that something was coming together in the center of Europe, which was going to change the world dramatically. And just around 1912, 1913, when the calendar was actually printed the first time, one called the center of Europe the powder keg, because one knew it was about to explode. And the very center of this was, of course, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where Rudolf Steiner himself had come from, where Karl König also came from. And this was the center of something that was going to change the world. And of course, we know it was a center for something that should have changed the world and didn't change it enough. But it was the center of the First World War. And I think we have to have that in the back of our head when we think about the origins of the current of the soul. Surely he was giving a medicine for the times he was living in. And what actually happened when he got back from this year of traveling, beginning of 1911? He went to Berlin, where his home was in that time. And he gave a series of lectures there about the Gospel of St. Mark. Now, I don't know if they're so well known here. They're certainly not so well known in Germany. And so I like to quote these lectures quite often because they are very, very special. And there he speaks about rhythms, and about rhythms in the connection to human development, but particularly in the question of how we come to decisions, how we deal with ideas. And he says there, for instance, that we shouldn't speak about an idea until we've digested it properly. And he says if it's something small, then 7 days is enough. But if it's something bigger, we need 7 weeks, or maybe another 7 weeks, or maybe 3 times 7 weeks. But if it's a really big idea, it needs 7 years. And people speak about things too quickly. They should really not only digest it, but, and this is, I think, an amazing thing he says there, if we live with an idea or with something we've realized, or maybe also a question we have, if we really live with that through a specific time, we don't only digest within ourselves, but it can be, he says, baptized by spirits. And it's quite, the translation here, yeah, okay, it's not quite so good, I think, but it says every impulse we feel in our souls must pass through 3 stages, so 3 times 7 weeks or 7 years even, before it becomes right within us. This holds as regards small ideas. For more important ideas, longer periods of time are necessary. And he speaks about 7 years. From this, you can see that the important thing is not so much what the human being of today thinks or what impulses are in his soul, but that he has the power to bear these impulses with patience, to allow them to be baptized by world spirits, and then emerge when they are ripe. So it's not only a ripening within ourselves, but a ripening in the connection with world spirits. And from there, all of a sudden, he brings a completely different, or seemingly completely different concept, and saying we actually need a new calendar in our times. So, now this is a good year before the calendar of the soul was actually published, but surely this is what he must have had in mind. And he says that because people are becoming more self-reliant, because they hearken more and more to their own individuality, they must try to develop within them an inner calendar. An inner calendar. Just as an outer calendar is of importance to external affairs, so in the future, when the intensity of the human soul has increased, one will feel inner weeks, will feel an inward ebb and flow in one's life of feeling and experience. Because inner Sundays, isn't that lovely? I mean, outer Sundays have more or less disappeared, you know, because it doesn't make any difference what day of the week it is anymore. The human being will progress in accordance with this inwardness. And so, you see, an inner calendar, an ebb and flow of life forces, is what he's saying, and inner Sundays that belongs together with the question of how we let things ripen within our soul and how we get it to be baptized by world spirits. So I think one can see that that is pretty exactly what came then as a calendar of the soul. He doesn't say so at that day. And we know that there was a person at these lectures in Berlin that traveled with him to Italy. Then he went to Bologna, then to the philosophy congress in Bologna, gave the talk there. And I don't know if you know that talk, it's very difficult to read. And actually, he was asked afterwards, he spent some time in Italy with a few friends around him, and he was asked there by Alexander Strakot, why did you talk about philosophy like that? Those philosophers couldn't understand you. and he said, you know, sometimes some things have to be said. That's interesting, I think, you know. So often you hear that Rudolf Steiner says things because he's asked, right? But there are some places where he has to say something even if it's not asked for. So he was not a big success at this Congress of Philosophers. And afterwards, these questions came, but another question came. Immer von Eckhart Stein, she was an artist, and she said, don't you think that we should create a new calendar for the Theosophical Society then? And of course, he was pleased that this question came because surely he had intended that and was, in this case, waiting to see if it was asked for. And there came the question. So he said, yes, let's do that. I will do my part and you'll do your part, and we'll put that together when we meet in Berlin next time. And that was also Christmas time that they met in Berlin and began creating what then became the Calendar of the Soul. I won't say too much about that now because it goes on. We'll be speaking about this in the next lectures. But one thing is I would like to show you this first publication. This is a new addition to our archive. This is what it looks like. It's a beautiful book, isn't it? And you can see there are two swans at the top of it meeting together. And the interesting thing about it is, and this is one of the problems of the book, people didn't understand it. Okay, so we can say, you don't understand the verses of the soul calendar so easy anyway. But surely people didn't understand why the date 1879 was on the front of it, because it was 1912. It was a calendar for 1912, 1913. And in the front, there are pages for each week with commemoration dates and new drawings. This was Immer von Eckhart Stein who made these drawings for the zodiac signs very beautifully. It's very beautifully done. But then in the second half, the verses of the Calendar of the Soul. But he was asking a lot of people, because he was asking them not only to start the week really with a Sunday, inner Sundays that we've heard, but also to start the year with Easter. That's unusual. You know, we start our year with Christmas, with 1st of January. And so that'll be over here. No, we started Easter. That's right over there. That's the beginning of the pictures, is Easter. But that means if we start our time counting with Easter and not with Christmas, we start 33 years later. And I've asked again and again, can you say that once more? Because I don't get that. Well, because Easter was, of course, 33 years after Christmas, right? Historically. So if you're beginning this calendar with Easter, you're beginning it 33 years later than the usual way of reckoning time. That's quite a new thing. So this was 1879, and you've heard the date of 1879 before. That's the date Rudolf Steiner gave as the date of the appearance of St. Michael and the beginning of the new age after the Dark Ages, after the Kali Yuga. So it's a very specific date he's giving here, 1879, not 1912. And I think at the time it was much too difficult for people. The world situation was incredibly complex. Also, the situation of it was still a Theosophical society. The situation there was very difficult. I'll be talking about that sometime next week, right? And so I just touch on it now to say how difficult those times were. And people just didn't take it up seriously enough. He was hoping that this would be published every year and would be transformed from year to year. These drawings weren't quite the way he wanted them, and he wanted that to progress, to develop from year to year, and that didn't happen. This was the end of this effort. Strangely, you know. So the talk in Bologna, he had to give that, but the calendar of the soul, no, it wasn't asked for, it wasn't taken up, so it stopped. And it wasn't published for a number of years. Very strange. The next time it was published was during the First World War. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but he was asked by Emil Molt, the co-founder of the First Waldorf School, and of course he owned the cigarette factory in Stuttgart. He had little booklets in his cigarette packets. That was quite usual at that time to put something, pictures or, but Emil Molt had a mission with his cigarette packets. He wanted education for normal people, you know. So there are all sorts of themes that he got little booklets made of and put into the cigarette packets. And he asked Rudolf Steiner if it would be possible to put the calendar of the soul in the packet. And he said yes, because it was 1918 and a very difficult situation, of course, in the front lines. And these cigarette packets were all going to the front lines. So now, since a couple of weeks, we have one of those in the archive. Now, why that's special? Because, of course, most of them didn't come back. So these little booklets were given to soldiers in the front line who were in the greatest danger, who were meeting death. And we also know a few cases where this changed lives also. We don't know of too many because they didn't come back, but from some we know that. And this little booklet was only to be put in the cigarette packets. Expressly, Rudolf Steiner did not want them to be sold. This was not for his dear friends. It was only for the soldiers. Well, I guess because it wasn't taken up seriously enough, he was giving it to where it was needed most. And 1918, the same year, he was asked again to make a publication of these verses because Hermann Hesse was making a library, a series of books for the German prisoners of war. And Rudolf Steiner was asked to design a volume in that series, the German prisoners of war. So the main content of that were the 52 verses. And there you see, he doesn't give it to the unconsulted friends, he gives it there where it's needed most. And where people are facing death and the greatest difficulties, the greatest hardships. And I'm so happy to have these actually in the archive now that we can see and we can show you how these books actually, what they look like. It was not printed again until basically on his deathbed. And there we have this situation again where we can have the feeling he knew it was needed. And therefore, basically the last thing Rudolf Steiner did on his deathbed was to inaugurate the next printing of the Calendar of the Soul in the sort of form we know it today, without all these pages for each week and that sort of stuff, without the pictures of the pictures again of the signs of the zodiac. That was no longer there, just the verses of the Calendar of the Soul. The way we know it today, that was published in 1925. He drew the design for the cover on his deathbed and said the printer should show him the proofs before it went to print. And that happened also. He signed the proofs and died just 3 days later. And in the week after his death, the Calendar of the Soul as we know it was printed. So on our little booklet that we've just done, we've actually put this design on the back, so you can see how Rudolf Steiner wanted that to look. I think it's very, very special. See the 12 stars, and I always like to ask people, take a good look at it. Are the stars coming down, or are we going to the stars? And very often people said, it's both. I think that's true. That's what the Calendar of the Soul is about. If you follow the verses, I think you can say it's a pathway to the stars, through the spheres of the stars maybe, to find one's true identity. And on the other hand, it is the question of how we allow the forces of the stars to penetrate earthly life through ourselves. That, I think, is the, let's say that is the heart gesture of these verses, is the combination of these two streams, to reach to the stars, to find our own true identity. And that is particularly in the first half of the Calendar of the Soul. Going from Easter to Michaelmas, which is over here, but from Michaelmas towards Easter again, in the second half, we find that very much the theme is there of how we can use, how we can also give the forces we've arrived at through this process. How can this be given to the earth? And I think that's a very, very serious question for our time. How can we see our own path to the stars, if one would like to say it like that, or to our own true self? How can we see that as a process to fructify, to re-enliven the earth itself, not just for our own gain? That is, of course, the center of any anthroposophical path. And the Calendar of the Soul, I think, shows that in an exemplary way. Each verse will tell us something of this, how we need to reach to this, to our own true identity, because this is needed on earth. And when he sent these booklets to the front line, he wrote a new preface. And there we find a very, people don't read things like this, you know, I have to write a lot of introductions to books, that's right. You know, I like to tell people, please read the introduction as well. Don't skip through it and start on page 1, but see what the introduction says. I think that's very true of the kind of the soul. Maybe one should read that every week when you take out the verse, you know, read the preface first, because there are some very interesting riddles there. And in this edition he sent to the front lines, there was a new preface, and in there comes this sentence. So, these are verses to be contemplated, to be lived with, and they are to awaken something in the soul, so we can, he says, to partake in the meaningful course of the world as it comes to life in the rhythms of time. Now, I think it's amazing that he says this to the soldiers in the front lines. He didn't say it to the Theosophic Society, right? How could they have understood that? Well, probably through the heart, and because they were in this situation they were in. But then this line comes. Thereby, the soul becomes fully aware of the delicate yet vital threads of connection that exist between itself, the soul, and the world into which it has been born. A philosophical sentence. But we see that the character of the soul is not something to just lead us to the stars and say goodbye to all our problems, but completely the opposite. It is showing us the connection we actually have as a soul that does not necessarily belong to the earth, towards the earth. These delicate but vital threads that connect us to the world. And so I think that is, you know, for today's situation, particularly important. So, bless you. We see how Rudolf Steiner with these verses was connecting us in one way to the cosmic rhythms, but on the other hand, of course, to earthly rhythms. We as human beings stand between cosmic rhythms and earthly rhythms. We are the vessel, so to speak, that can connect one to the other. It doesn't, and certainly this is the case in our time, this doesn't happen without a human being. And I do believe that is the biggest problem we have to deal with today, that this connection between the life forces of the cosmos and the earth has more or less been severed. And we haven't come to enough realization of our connection between the two, of our ability also to connect the earthly world to the cosmos. You know, we would like the environmental question to be a political question or a scientific question, something like that. But no, it's not just that. It is very much a deeply human question. How do we understand the human being in this interconnection between the cosmic rhythms and the earthly rhythms? Well, we'll be talking about that also during these days, but I wanted to touch on that because that is deeply implanted into the structure of the verses of the Kind of the Soul, not only into the words of each verse, but into the process we go through. Now, let's take a look at that, because I want to look at it through the eyes of Karl König. That's why the pictures are here too. When did Karl König start with his work on the Kind of the Soul? Well, he decided in 1933, we know that because we have his diaries. He didn't say anything about it. But in 1933, for a particular point of history, of course, he knew that it was time to do something very specific for the world situation. What better than the current of the soul? He must have understood in a very deep fashion what Rudolf Steiner had intended with these verses, to understand it would be the medicine for the situation of his time, 1933. So you see the link back to, said 1910, this impression of the Christ being in a new realm. And 1933, when the Antichrist begins to show itself. And Karl König, who was very conscious of this, what does he do? He takes up the calendar of the soul. As I say, we only know it from his diaries because he didn't speak of it how long? 7 years. There is nothing in any of his writings. He gave a lot of lectures. You know, we have notes of over 1,900 lectures he gave. But between 1933 and 1940, there was nothing about the calendar of the soul. No word. He must have known about these riddles and how he needed to deeply live with this impulse before he could speak about it. He didn't even speak about it in 1940, but he did his pictures. That's when he just arrived in Scotland, 1939, as one of the refugees who was allowed to go to Britain. They were, as I said beforehand, hand-picked people who were allowed to enter England. And unfortunately, one has to say that was the case in most countries, that not anybody was allowed to emigrate out of Central Europe. But Britain took 50 Jewish doctors, obviously knowing that doctors were going to be needed. So Koenig was able to go to England and start then in the north of Scotland with what became then the Camphill movement. But very soon, in 1940, when the war began, there was this legend that amongst the Jewish refugees there were spies, and therefore they all had to be interned. And all these people who had been handpicked already, they were physicians, they were artists, they were professors, they were professional people, most of them. They were all interned, and a whole bunch of them on the Isle of Man, which is a bit of a strange thing because it was, first of all, it was all men who were interned there. And all the poor people were turned out of the hotels, and it was a seaside resort, and everybody was sent away, and they took over all the hotels and put the refugees in there. Strange thing was that the first prisoners of war were also put into the internment camps because, as usual in Britain, one was not prepared for anything, you know. When the first snow comes in Britain, one's not prepared for it, right? When the roads freeze, oh, we didn't know it was going to freeze. And the same with wartime, you know, they didn't know there were going to be prisoners of war, so there was no facilities. So what did they do? They put them into these internment camps. So we have this strange situation that all these Jewish people were put together with the first prisoners of war from the Nazi troops. And okay, that would be a story that's own, I can tell you. What happened there was quite amazing. But it became something like a free university there. And of course, all these professional people had a lot to give, and they were allowed to have their musical instruments. They had an orchestra. They sang choir every week, and Karl König must have also told the story how amazing it was that all these Nazi troops who were put into the camp sang along with them every week. And the only time you knew a difference was when the radio was on and who cheered at which point, then you knew who they were. But yeah, really a strange situation. On the other hand, outwardly, the Camphill movement was just starting. All the women were still at home and taking the children in, and it was going to be, however, a spiritual community out of anthroposophy. So it gave Karl König the best opportunity, really, to deepen this spiritual impulse of the calendar of the soul. That became, in 1940, through these pictures, basically the the undercurrent, the spiritual undercurrent of the Camphill movement. And he really urged over the years then that everyone should take this, not just as a nice verse to speak, as a verse before breakfast or something, but really as a meditative path. This was his wish. And from then, from 1941, he was then he was allowed to be free and go back to the women folk and to then begin with the Camphill movement. From that day onwards, he actually did almost nothing without the calendar of the soul. He used it for everything. Said nothing for 7 years, and then it just poured out of him. Not these pictures, by the way. They disappeared. He gave them to his wife as soon as he was set free, and nobody else saw them until 1972. So it's a bit strange, but it was a deepening for his own experience so that he could encourage people to take this part themselves. And that is then the next phase, these 13 pictures of the cross. I'll tell you a little bit about that, because that was what he developed with his fellow co-workers in the Camphill movement. And that was what he encouraged them to use as their inner path. So he had found already in 1933, you know that from his diary, that there were not just 2 verses that belong together, but 4. And if we look at these 4 verses that belong together, we enter into a completely new experience of rhythm. Now, I'd like to just give you a glimpse into this, and I hope it's not going to be too complex, not going to be very mathematical, because I'm no good at mathematics anyway. So, color, and I haven't been in a classroom for a long time now, so you'll excuse me if my circle is not very much of a circle, okay? We'll give it a try. All right, it's not too bad. So if we think of the cycle of the year, right, and we start somewhere with Easter, let's take Easter here. So that is number 1. We're starting the year with Easter, that's verse 1. And the usual way of thinking about time or using time or planning time, like our calendars that hang on the wall, is that we go from 1 to 2 to 3, and we go from Easter to St. John's. Oh, let's go this way. May I go anti-clockwise, please? St. John we'll put down here, and from St. John then to Michaelmas, and from Michaelmas to Christmas. We take the 4 big festivals, and then again to Easter. So we're going this way around. Yeah? So Koenig says, no, this is completely linear. We're actually, even if we put it into a circle, we're just going from one day to the next. And it becomes actually, and I think you can all experience that, it's not so very easy to plan things, because all of a sudden it's actually Christmas when you didn't think it was, we're still in autumn, and okay, so the stores have got Christmas stuff there, but you don't really sort of plan things very well. It's not easy to plan if one's just going from day to day. It is completely a spatial experience that has got not very much to do with time. So I guess there's a few eurythmists here, right? Some eurythmists? No? Oh, what a shame.
Yeah, people who like to do your living.
Ah, okay, great. Everybody likes to do eurythmy. So, eurythmists will say, well, of course, you don't take the cycle of a year in a circle, but in a lemniscate. Right? Yeah, because, of course, we know that winter half year is an inner feeling, and summer half year is an outer feeling. So if we do a lemniscate, then we have this completely different picture. I'm just going to do this. All right. So if we have Christmas here and St. John's here, and we see in winter time we have this smaller circle more within ourselves, more focused. But in the summer half year, we are more outside towards the cosmos. That's the path of the kind of the soul anyway, that we have, and of course, you know, the kind of the soul has these opposite verses. One will always talk about an inner journey and the other one an outer journey, so to speak. We can see that quite easily in the kind of soul. But the thing is, as soon as we do a bit of eurythmy, we will experience that it's not just a double process, that it's actually fourfold. Because when we go from Easter to St. John's, is a completely different mood because we are going outwards. Right? After St. John's, we begin to go inwards. That is the wonderful thing about St. John's Festival, isn't it? It's not the height of the year, it's 3 days later. Just like Christmas is actually 3 days after the winter solstice. So we are already over the peak, right? And so St. John's shows us the way to Michaelmas. The wonderful thing is with the lemniscate, that Michaelmas and Easter fall together. They're the crossing point. Isn't it amazing how often, particularly in the last years of his life, Rudolf Steiner talks about Michaelmas and Easter belonging together, and how we really need to, when we celebrate Michaelmas, take Easter with us. And then we see all of a sudden, if we take this path of the calendar of the soul seriously, that actually Easter and Michaelmas fall together. They are the crossing point of this process. But it is, in the summer half year, it is a double movement. It is going outwards and going inwards. And in the Christmas part of the year, it's exactly the same. From Michaelmas to Christmas, we are going inwards. But from Christmas to Easter, we are in this inner space, but going outwards. It's fourfold. And so this has, of course, to do with the 4 main festivals, but it is a breathing process through the year. And we can see, actually, not just a breathing process. The twofold process is a breathing process, inward and outward. But now we have a fourfold process to go with it. So we know, of course, for every breath, we have, when we're balanced, 4 beats of the heart. It's a 4 to 1. And this is exactly what we have here. The year becomes, so to speak, like the heart, because it has this breath, inward, outward breath, and at the same time, 4 beats of the heart. And so, in actual fact, we see here already how the breathing process of the earth links to cosmic rhythms in the beats of the heart. Because these beats of the heart are the festivals. And the festivals actually are not, first of all, earthly festivals. They are spiritual festivals. And of course, they have a role in social life, of course, but their origin is spiritual. We're speaking here about the heart of the universe that speaks into the earthly breathing process. So we're going to talk about this still, I think, next week. We touch there on this question of how we as human beings can link earthly breathing to cosmic rhythms. The festivals play a huge part in this. So we have 4 different moods, and actually Karl König, who was quite a musician, before he studied medicine, he wanted actually to be a musician, and decided, no, he could probably do more for humanity in the situation at the time by being a physician. But he took this musicality with him. He said, you know, these 4 moods are like 4 voices that sing together. And if we really can imagine each week 4 verses speaking, it is like 4 voices of music. And we spoke about this Christmas mood, this inner mood, the female voices, let's go this way from, Michaelmas to Christmas. The deeper voice from Christmas to Easter, the higher voice, right? With Christmas, this, how should I say, this joy of Easter already comes in. So this is the soprano voice that sounds going from Christmas to Easter, whereas from Michaelmas to Christmas, we have the alto voice. Whereas here down, we have from Easter to St. John's, we have the higher male voice, the tenor. Whereas from St. John's to Michaelmas, we have the deeper voice, this is the baritone. So that's the way Koenig tried to describe the moods that we can maybe hear if we try and take up 4 verses each. Well, it's difficult enough to take 1 verse, right? But it's no, we need to take 4 voices, and each week to experience 1 verse from each part of the year. Each of these moods speaks, if we follow this pattern of the verses. Now, how do we know that? It's this very strange thing, and I think, unfortunately, that's not found its way into the English translations very often, that Rudolf Steiner not only gave numbers for the verses from 1 to 52, St. John's with 12, and Michaelmas with 26, and Christmas with 38. And he gave each verse a number, but not only that, he gave a letter for each verse. And you saw, well, why? And that was left out also in the German publications. That was left out quite often because one didn't know what that really meant, you know. And so, okay, there aren't 52 letters in the alphabet, right? So you're forced really to do something else. He used the alphabet twice. You've seen that before? So he starts with A at Easter. It's still here. Easter is A, and there goes B, C, D, right the way around to Michaelmas. And with Michaelmas, you've got C. And the week after Michaelmas starts again with A. But then he puts a line over the top of it. Very strange. Why does he do that? You know, numbers would be enough. No, because we see with that there are two A's, two B's, two C's, two D's, and they belong together. So we can see the way Rudolf Steiner, look at his handwriting, you see there how there are 4 verses that belong together, not just 2. So Easter, for instance, has 1, but it has an A. And over here, we see, interestingly, it doesn't connect to Michaelmas, which is a Z, but it connects to the week after Michaelmas, which has an A, 27. You ever wondered about that, why that is? But Easter and Michaelmas surely should belong together. No, not quite. It's a little bit different. And this is the strange thing that we see in this rhythm, that we don't have Christmas and St. John's, Easter and Michaelmas being opposite to each other. But in actual fact, across from Easter is the week after Michaelmas. And verse 52 belongs to Michaelmas. They're the opposites. So that's quite an interesting thing. And if we look at that a bit more closely, we can see how, where are opposites in the calendar of the soul? Let's take the Easter verse, this beautiful opening of the calendar of the soul. I think it sounds like trumpets and trombones. When from the world's wide realms, the sun to human beholding speaks. So wonderful, that's the opening. Think of Goethe, the sound of the sun. It's the way he begins Easter morning. And it's St. Michael who says, Raphael, that says these words, the healer Raphael, that says, when from the world's wide realms, the sun to human beholding speaks. Where is the opposite to that? It is actually not at Michaelmas, but it is, of course, the opposite to Easter? No? Verse 52. It's Holy Week. When from the depths of soul the spirit turns to the life of worlds, the language is completely the opposite. Isn't that strange? So we don't have, first of all, this opposites of Michaelmas and Easter, but we have, from the point of view of language, we have Easter and verse 52 are opposite to each other, and exactly the same with Michaelmas too. Michaelmas and the week after Michaelmas belong together as opposites, so to speak. They're turning points in the year, of course. What could be more different than Holy Week and Easter week? Because that is where the deed of Christ actually is. Nothing is the same after that. It is the biggest jump, so to speak, in the whole year. So Easter week and Holy Week are opposite to each other, and nevertheless have the same letters as Michaelmas and the week after Michaelmas. You see how we get these 4 verses that belong together. It's quite easy to see, because if we follow what happens here, of course, verse 2 belongs to 51, and 3 to 50, and 4 to 49, right? This opens up. Isn't that wonderful that from Easter this experience opens up? And Michaelmas exactly the same. To find the opposite verses at Michaelmas, you just have to hear some verses, and you can experience how this experience of Michaelmas opens up. And so we have a cross these four verses that belong together show us a cross, a very particular sort. I mean, it's not even the St. Andrew's cross because it's right, the verses are close together, right? It's a cross like this. But from week to week, this cross moves. You understand that, right? Because each verse goes this way and this way, this way and this way. So each week, if we look at these four verses, we have a completely different situation, a completely different connection of verses to each other. Here we are right next to Easter and right next to Michaelmas, but we're moving further and further away from it. And so this cross is a different cross each week. Until, of course, we get to, oh, that's not going to be very exact now, I'm afraid, but never mind. Let's just put it in here. Until we get to a point where this cross gets to the right angle. Yeah? That's the middle point, so to speak, right? When this opens up, when our experience of Easter opens up, we get to one point where we have a right-angled cross. And that's what Karl König did with these 13 cross, the metamorphosis of the cross, these pictures. He shows us how this opens up every week. And there is a different connection of the seasons to each other every week. It's not just the same, you know? It's not like we go from one to the next, but it is a completely different connection of verses to each other. Until they get so far away from each other that this, he called it the cross of death, actually comes about. Mathematics is not too difficult. No, it's imaginable.
This is geometry.
It's geometry.
Yeah.
Right.
That's easy.
Right. So you can tell me, of course, where this happens. Which verses are they? Which verses are they when we're right in the middle of this opening up? Can you imagine where that is? My drawing's not good enough to be able to see it, I'm afraid. Try it yourself. Yeah, I'm sure you'll be able to do it better. But it opens up from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And with the 7th verse, we actually get this right-angled cross. And that's where Karl König said that is the cross of death, of course. You look at the calendar of the soul, wow, these are the verses of death. The word death only comes in the calendar of the soul twice. And they belong in this cross. There's a word death in. Where do you think it could be? Where does death come into the seasons of the year?
Winter solstice. Winter solstice. No?
Not in the calendar of the soul, anyway.
I'm surprised.
Or
Is
Halloween. Story.
Oh.
Yeah, it's verse 33. It's November.
Oh.
It's November. Yeah. I mean, November is a time when we have all the commemoration days of those who died, right? And so it's verse 33 that belongs to this cross. 33. And let me read you this verse. It's quite amazing because we're in autumn, we're in November, right? And only now do I feel the world, which without the compassion of my soul would be mere frosty empty life, revealing itself as void of power, without creating itself anew through souls, it could of itself find only death. That is the most amazing verse, I think, because in autumn, we have to realize that the earth is dependent on the human being. Yes, we're dependent on the earth, but there we realize that the earth can only die, can only find death in itself. without the human soul. It's quite clear in the verse, really. Without creating itself anew through souls, it could of itself find only death. So where's the second verse that speaks of death? It gets difficult now because we're so far away, right? We can find the verses that are closer to Easter very, very easy. But to find the opposite from there is not easy. What's the opposite verse from 33, from autumn? Any ideas?
Somewhere in winter,
Huh?
in the depth of winter.
No, the week of Ash Wednesday.
Huh?
Is it the week of Ash Wednesday?
Ah, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Well, let's hear the 33, the beginning of 33 again, and we'll come back to that one. 33. Only now do I feel the world. Okay. Now there is a verse that begins, only now do I feel my being. And that is the second verse of death. It's actually completely somewhere else. It's in August. And that's so difficult to understand to start with, but we can find it. Only now do I feel my being, which separated from world's being would extinguish itself from within, and relying solely on its own resources would only find its death within. That's a problem today, isn't it? We're relying solely on its own resources. Cutting myself off from the spirit world. And that is a death process. But that is a death process not of outer nature, but of inner self. And therefore, it is actually in summer, it's in August, after St. John's. That's verse 20. So, I hope this doesn't confuse you. I've done it the other way around here. I've got St. John's at the top and autumn at the bottom, right? But there are two verses that belong to that are also opposites, where this death process comes in. And the word death only comes twice, these two. But in the two other verses that belong to this cross, the word threaten comes in. Only twice in the whole of the calendar of the soul. You know where that is? You do, yeah.
Yeah, Ash Wednesday.
Yes, it's flashing. Carnival.
Yes.
Yeah. It's let's find it. So that's verse 46. The world, it threatens to benumb the inborn forces of the soul. That is a threat of death, isn't it? So you see, this threat of death comes with carnival, and the actual death process comes in summer, the inner death process. So that belongs together. That's verse 46. So, and the fourth verse of this cross is also quite unexpected, probably. Where is this outer death process to be found?
7.
Yeah, Ascension?
Huh?
Is it Ascension?
7.
You got it. Yes, that's the second time where the word threaten comes in. That's verse 7. Myself, it threatens to flee, strongly lured by the light of words. It's quite an amazing verse. And that's quite a turning point of the kind of soul. This jubilation that comes at Easter, and we go into this process of leaving ourselves to find ourselves into the height of summer. And there, verse 7 says, hold it, stop. Myself, it threatens to flee, strongly lured by the light of worlds. My power of prescience now arise and take your rightful role. Replace my force of thought which in all the senses glory would but lose itself. So with ascension, we have this warning that we can fall into this trap of death. Myself, it threatens to flee, strongly lured by the light of worlds. No, we have to go through this death process. That's what Easter actually should tell us. You know, this the words of Christ before Easter. No, do not build this hut now, because I need to go through death. And we have to say that as human beings too. We have to go through this process of death in autumn. Not at Easter, but in autumn. That's interesting. Right? For us, it's a Michaelmas experience. And so, in the middle, between Easter and Michaelmas, we hear this voice telling us, be aware, this death process is coming. And so, we have, that's verse 7. I should do that differently. It's 46. Let's do it like this, 20 and 7. So, there you go. 7 and 20 are opposite to each other. Twice the threatening and twice the death. And that is the cross that is in the middle of this process of the cross. And that's why, excuse me, people who are on the Zoom, if I get this cross, I'll show you why Koenig, for his cross metamorphosis, actually draws this right-angled cross, or this 7th cross, where these 4 verses come together. 7 and 20, 33 and 46. And we can see how the year is, so to speak, divided up into 4 equal sections. And that is, you know, if you think of 4 verses belonging together, and you think, well, 4 times 12 is actually not 52, right? It would be so much easier if 4 times 12 was 52. Or there were maybe 48 weeks in a year or something like that. But it doesn't work like that, you know. I'm no mathematician, so I can't tell you why that is. But 52 is certainly a number that belongs to the mysteries. That's why we have 52 playing cards too, right? That's not a children's game. That came from the mysteries, of course. Now, when one knows that there are 4 suits of cards, 4 times 12 making 48, and then 4 that don't belong. And these 4 that don't belong are these 4 verses of the cross. They don't belong to the seasons. They divide the seasons. So after verse 33, we actually make this change over from, here is verse 33, the death of the outer world. That is the boundary of Michaelmas. That's where Michaelmas ends and Christmas time begins.
It's Advent, that's where Advent begins.
Yeah, right. After 33, Advent begins. Yeah, right. And similarly, also, of course, with Whitsun time. With Whitsun, summertime begins, St. John's, right? And Easter time ends. That's well known, of course. Just the same as we have 12 weeks of Christmas, actually. Usually we talk about Advent, but of course Christmas doesn't end with Christmas Day, but it continues. You know, in the south of Germany, for instance, one still celebrates Christmas until Candlemas. That's the last week of Christmas. And it is so in the calendar, so too. And so Christmas time goes up to here. This is verse 45, is the last week of Christmas. 46 is the first verse, or the verse which divides Christmas time then with Easter. So these 4 don't really belong to this process. It's like a waiting or a, how shall I say, pralaya, a transition from one season to the other. And in this way, the calendar of the soul actually has 12 verses for each season, or 12 verses for each festival. And it's quite amazing to see that, because you can see how that mirrors around each festival. Okay? But these 4 verses do not belong to the festivals. They are the abyss between the festivals. So I think that's quite amazing. This is, by the way, the only one of Karl König's drawings that has changed with these years since 1940, because he made this very strong black cross. I think he put so much crayon onto this black that is peeled off with time, and you can actually see how it's disappeared. The others, I think, are more or less the way they always were, but here the color must have been so thick that it's just gone with time. So he was trying to show us how this is really a dividing line between the seasons. So we have the 7th cross as the center of the 13. 6 crosses and 6 crosses. And in the middle, this one, which is the cross of death. Well, I don't want to tell you too much about that. You can take a look at them afterwards. But I would like to say the pictures that Karl König made are not meant as works of art. They are not impressions of the verse. They're not impressionistic. They're not works of art of their own, but they try to point to the interconnections of the verses. And so you will see that there are motives that come again and again. The river, for instance, we find Goethe's fairy tale, we find the ferryman, the snake, in a number of places, because it shows us the connection of one verse to the other, meaning that we don't just go from one week to the next through the year in a spatial fashion, but that we begin to realize the rhythms, that is rhythm of the heart that belongs to the year. And if we hear these words of Rudolf Steiner, that the calendar of the soul is a path of feeling, what better way to enter this realm of feeling than through art, than through rhythm? So I think Karl König was using what Rudolf Steiner himself also called illustrative art. Rudolf Steiner wanted very strongly that one would develop illustrative art again, which had already been lost in his time. Today, I think it's almost non-existent. You know, I mean, Dickens, for instance, wouldn't publish a book without pictures in it, right? Not because people couldn't read, but because he wanted the words to be illustrated. And in a similar way that we know music has illustrated poetry. You ask people this ode to joy, for instance, who wrote that, right? You know, the ode to joy, and everybody says Beethoven wrote it. So, no, it's Schiller, it's a poem, but everybody knows the music by Beethoven. I said, Beethoven wrote that. No, he didn't. It's a poem by Schiller, but Beethoven made it immortal through the music. And in a similar way, Rudolf Steiner hoped that illustrative art in painting and drawing would again be revived. And I think Karl König has actually tried his best to make these pictures not works of art of their own, but illustrations of the rhythms that live in the calendar of the soul. He actually spoke about the architecture of the calendar of the soul. Towards the end of his life, he spent the rest of his life living with the calendar of the soul, where every patient, the birthday was important. Every child he saw to come to schools, the birthday was important. where is the birthday in the calendar of the soul? Which verse belongs to that child or that patient? And similarly also to historic dates. In what verse of the calendar of the soul did this or this take place? And at the end of his life, he said, this is a tremendous architecture of rhythms of the calendar of the soul. And this architecture leads us on a path, as he said, through the stars to the realm where the etheric Christ today lives. Then we come full circle to, I think, where Rudolf Steiner came from with these verses. But let me leave it at that now, and we can gladly talk a bit about it, or we can also go around the pictures together and look at this and that, because I can't describe every picture. That would take a few days.
How about just the one from this week?
Done?
How about just the one from this?
That's the cross for this week.
Oh.
Yes, yes, it's down here. Exactly. It's a wonderful cross, I think, because of course we are coming towards Michaelmas. And so that is the picture for today. And I was saying before, this is the only picture that Karl König drew as an autobiographic picture. It is his situation in Scotland, looking at this beautiful mountain, Benahi, from Kirkton House, where this group of refugees were allowed to live, and taking leave also of this landscape and of his daughter, because he was then interned. So it's a very specific situation on the one hand, but it also has something to do with this time of year. It has a certain melancholy to it, but this realization should be there. You see, above Benahi, there is this beautiful five-pointed star. Karl König's guiding star is there. And so he can say with this verse, the year has given itself to me. And within the star, I can imagine what has been given to me for the future. And exactly the same time after Michaelmas, we come to this picture, where we have a duality here. We have father and daughter, right? We have the old and the future, so to speak. Whereas here, after Michaelmas, it's very definitely threefold. And we come to a situation where from the twofold experience of old and new, then a threefold experience can come about. And top and bottom, just to say briefly, of course, it's Goethe's fairy tale belongs to this. It's the snake and the ferryman in both pictures. That can lead us across the threshold. So we find these images again and again that show how the verses belong together. That's this week is a very special week, I find. This what we gain out of the Michaelmas experience comes then in the opposite verse to this week that we. So that's this week, and the opposite verse is here. So what do we gain out of this experience? Through Michaelmas. And allow me to read that, verse 30. So, from today, what am I aiming for through this Michaelmas experience? Sprouting in the sunlight of my soul, that's an amazing expression, are thinking's ripening fruits. And that is amazing because we've left thought behind originally with Whitson. We've left thought behind and we're following this path of feeling. And now after Michaelmas, we can come to a new level of thought, thinking's ripening fruits, and to security of self-awareness, all my feeling is transformed. You see, we are told throughout this series of verses how thought has to be let go to the cosmos and regained, how feeling is transformed to what? To security of self-awareness. Joyfully I now can sense autumn's spirit wakening. The winter will awake in me the summer of the soul. So we have this seed of will that we find at Nicholas, and we see this threefold expression in this verse of thinking, feeling, and willing, in a certain balance. And in the picture, Karl König has shown what the center motive is of this transformation of thinking, feeling, and willing. The fishes have always been a symbol of the etheric Christ. And there they are in the center of this picture. So, for this week. Would anybody like to add or ask? I hope I didn't confuse you completely with backwards and forwards, you know.
I'm still stuck on the swans and the cigarette cards.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
to begin with, what do you think of as the symbology of the swans? Why choose swans?
Yeah. Let me put an image to that, first of all, because this year of 1879, yeah, this year 1912 was exactly 100 years after the birth of Caspar Hauser. I think that's quite significant. That's something that Rudolf Steiner didn't talk about too much, but you can find these motives again and again that must have been quite close to Rudolf Steiner's heart. And we do know at the end of his life, he gave these three riddles that were to be solved. One of them being, where did Caspar Hauser come from? And Caspar Hauser was a symbol in itself, so to speak. That's what Wassermann said about him, the novelist who wrote the novel of Caspar Hauser. Yeah, he became a symbol. And everything that happened around Caspar Hauser had this symbolic character. And the very point where Caspar Hauser met Christianity, took in Christianity, was of course his confirmation, which happened in the Chapel of the Swan in Ansbach. That says something about this individuality of Caspar Hauser. Well, we'll talk about that later on also, where we know from Rudolf Steiner that he had a very particular task on earth that had to do with the upholding of our spiritual connection. So, and that was the Order of the Swan had this responsibility too. I don't know if you know about the Order of the Swan. No, it was a Michaelmas foundation. Michaelmas, oh, my history fails me now. It's 1640. Yes? You're going to believe me. 1640, I think. 1640, on Michaelmas Day, the Order of the Swan was formed with the task of upholding humanity's connection to the spirit.
Oh, wow.
And each Knight of the Swan was given the task to connect to a soul that had died. And in this way, to connect the earth to the spirit. That was the way they tried that. And I do think that Rudolf Steiner was linking on to this with the Canon of the Soul. And here we have two swans meeting each other. And I think it's very touching that this symbol of the swan, that was, of course, the creature to connect the earthly world to the spirit world. We know that through many legends also. Lohengrin, for instance, was the swan. We know that the one of the highest levels of initiation was called the swan. So Rudolf Steiner links onto this in this year 1912, 100 years after the birth of Caspar Hauser, I think is significant. It's not just one swan, but it's the meeting of two swans. And he uses this for the years in the year of. That speaks, I think, quite a strong language. That's my impression. I've not read that anywhere. As far as I know, Rudolf Steiner said nothing about this cover. So, just my impression.
Anyone else have any questions? What about online? Does anyone online have any questions? David?
No, I just wondered if you drew the picture of the lemniscate, and in the drawing of that picture, you have the crossing point at Easter and Michaelmas.
Yeah.
But that's not the pairing up here. So is this a different rhythm down here than the rhythm that you're talking about on the circle?
No.
Because the verse from Easter does not pair with Michaelmas. Right. I'm wondering if that brings a slightly different dynamic, or
No.
is it meant to be slightly?
Well, if you transpose this to the lemniscate, then let me take a different color. Sorry, it's not exact enough to show you, but the cross of Easter and Michaelmas will be this very small square, so to speak, and this square gets bigger every week, right? You see? It's the same as these crosses from a geometrical point of view, because these four verses that are around this point belong together.
So it's the diagonals of those boxes that are the four verses that are related.
Yeah, right. So it's also this widening out.
I'm glad I asked the question because I didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. If you take a look at the book which is downstairs, Karl König's work on the calendar of the soul, you'll find that very early when he got back to Camphill, he got Carlo Pizzno, who was his artist, to draw this figure of the lemniscate and put all 52 verses onto it, and which is quite a difficult thing to draw, of course, but he did that, and that's in the book downstairs. You can see.
Oh, an actual illustration of this?
Yeah, it's a little illustration where you can see how these four verses belong together.
Richard,
it's just this widening out that we have with the cross too.
Can you hold up that Swan book again?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
And just hold it. I want to zoom in on it and see if we can get, for some reason it wasn't in focus, and now I'm going to see if I can get it in focus because everyone wants to see
So
it.
as opposed to the birth of the physical body in Christmas,
And
this is the birth of the eye,
and is this right up
as it
here?
says on the cover.
Okay,
In
and
Jahre 1869 nach der Ich-Geburt, the birth of the eye. So that is a different cycle than what we usually start with the 1st of January.
We have an online question.
Yeah.
Regine, I think is her name. She's asking, what letters belong to the cross?
The letters belonging to the cross. Okay. I have to look it up. So 20. is a T. Twenty is a T. Therefore, 33 is a T with a line over it. Okay? And 7 is a G. And so 46 is a G with a line. I work more with the numbers than I do with letters.
I have a question that takes us off in a whole different direction, but, and so you don't have to answer that, we could discuss it later. But I'm familiar with Christoph Andreas Lindenberg's work with the musical intervals through the year, based also on this landscape.
Yeah.
And just wonder if that really originated more with Karl König, or if Christoph Andreas's work arose out of this, were there indications given by Karl König?
Yeah.
In these intervals?
That's right, yeah, because Karl König was very interested, because he was musically interested, he wanted that composers would work with these indications and compose something for each week. And Christoph Andreas was at the time in Scotland, and he began with that. He composed one cross. It happened to be the Whitsun cross. And he composed, for me, a very difficult melody, because, of course, Whitsun cross means that Whitsun is in the foreground, so to speak, and the other 3 verses in the background. So we're hearing 3 voices, 3 verses that sound towards Whitsun. It's very complicated, but
All of his music.
all of his music is complicated. You're quite right, yeah. But that's where it originated, and Karl König was quite interested that somebody would take that up and maybe also compose all of the crosses, all 13. But that never got done.
Oh, I know Brian Masters has written a book of music.
Yes.
Out of the moods of the calendar of the soul, which is quite amazing to work with.
Absolutely, but it's a different principle.
Yes, it's not the same at all.
Yeah. You see, if I use these, I do every day. I use the cross and try to imagine now when I'm meditating the verse for this week that the other 3 sound, which is a lot easier to imagine when I got the pictures. Because to imagine 4 verses where they're actually all 52 are very difficult to understand, right? To really get hold of. But through the pictures, for me at least, there's you call it a doorway towards each verse. And therefore, after a while of using these pictures, I can imagine these 3 voices speaking to me this week. When I actually live with this particular verse, the other 3 are speaking, so it's. I can almost experience his musicality. I'm not musically enough myself to do that, but I can almost imagine that because I hear these 3 voices speaking. I think it'd be wonderful if they would sing. You know,
The thing that struck me when you spoke of this cross, this thing that struck me when you spoke of this cross was that the interval for ascension is the octave, which is not what one usually thinks of coming to an end in a way, but transforming into something new. So it's just interesting. I might have to go back and look at that in a different light.
Yeah. It's quite amazing, really, that we have this warning for ascension. You know, beware, don't lose yourself too much. Yes, you're in the process of connecting to the cosmos, but be careful. Right? It's this warning, and then we have Whitsun, and the week after Whitsun. So we have this mirror principle again. The week after Whitsun, we have the words "lose yourself." So a week before we heard "don't lose yourself," right? And now a week after Whitsun, "lose yourself." But then it says in order to find yourself. You see, this intention has to be there. This is the mood that comes already from influence. This will of intention is already speaking to us, so to speak. And so around Whitson, we have this mood, don't lose yourself in order to find yourself. It's in the German original, there's this wonderful word. When I learned German, I had a fantastic teacher. She said the most important word, there are two most important words in the German language. One of them is und, yeah, is and, which is actually like tying a knot. You know, imagine two pieces of string and you tie a knot in it. Yeah? That is the word und in German. And the other word, which doesn't translate into English at all, is the very simple word . And there are very few languages that have this. It exists in German. In order to, it's a beautiful little word, . So the two most important words of the German language, und and . Because one is binding, so to speak, the and, but is this conditional connection. Yeah? It's not tying them together, but it's saying, do so in order to have this intention. And that's what's in this. But we've tried to put that into the English words because I think it is so important, the words that Rudolf Steiner used. You know, is only once. And that is here. And so it must have a reason, this word. How do you put that into English? It's not easy. But it's exactly the opposite. You know, this warning, don't lose yourself. Don't lose yourself. And then you go into the soul.
Richard, can I just ask you to say one word? Because I always feel when the cross of death and danger is spoken about, how is that for someone whose birthday falls in that cross?
Yeah.
And when I've asked you something like that, you've spoken of it in terms of the redemption that occurs. And I wonder if you could just maybe end with a note of
Thank you.
lifting that up.
That's good. Also, Karl König gave a name of the disciples to each of the crosses, 13 crosses. And to the seventh cross, he gave the name of Judas. And so Judas is only one aspect, I think. The other aspect is, if we think of this as a threshold, if it is truly a threshold, and like we've just seen this threshold around Whitson, this threshold, the threshold in November, the threshold with Carnival, then it is a space of course on the threshold where the Christ being is guiding us. So it is death and resurrection belonging together in this situation. So you'll find this black cross in one place in the calendar of the soul, and that is the week before Michaelmas. There is the black cross, but there are the roses around it. So, and I think that needs to be experienced here, that yes, it is a cross of death, but of course it is because we are transitioning to the next state, to the next season, so to speak. So it's not the end. that would be false to think that, but it's wait, make a decision before you carry on. Make this decision. Yes, I want to, for a specific purpose, lose myself in order to find myself. That's a decision I need to make there. And I think that is the significance of these four verses also, that we take a conscious step into the next phase of the calendar of the soul. And we can know that we are guided in that transition.
Great.
So I like to see it as the space of the risen one also, and not just of Judas.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna come up here and say thank you to everyone who has been online. I know it's a little bit challenging because you're not in the room with us, but we're gonna take the camera and pan around. It's very hard to really get a sense of the quality of the images without seeing them live. So if you are nearby or near anywhere on the tour, we encourage you to go and seek out the live exhibit. Anyway, so we'll show you that, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And are you gonna be here?
I'm here, sure, if anybody would like to look at pictures, gladly.
Okay, so there'll be a little bit of gathering here, and then we also have refreshments downstairs. And then tomorrow night at 7 p.m. we have another talk, and I don't remember the title because I don't have it with me.
Well, the significance of the kind of the soul for education and curative education, right?
Yes, thank you. So we hope you will join us for that at 7 p.m. That is also the same Zoom link. And then, yeah, and so before we go out tonight, I'm gonna just pan the whole room so you get a sense of what our display space looks like at our branch in Chicago. Yeah, Mihai.
There is, I think, a question here that maybe now is a good time for this. Is there an online address where people can order your published materials?
Sure, yeah, the Karl König Institute. You can also get the volumes we've published, we get at any bookstore. Not this, this would have to be through our address, the Karl König Institute. But the 2 volumes that are downstairs about the Count of the Soul, they are available at bookstores.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna just zoom out. And then Richard, do you want to just kind of walk through the exhibit and explain what it is? And maybe just like give us the sort of the geography of the exhibit. And then if you guys don't mind like stepping back, because I'm going to take this camera and move it all around.
Okay, we're going to start here.
Okay, so we're going to start there.
So this is the first verse of the Count of the Soul, which is important.
Okay, and so it's going to be very hard for us to see this.
Okay.
I'm probably really not going to be able to give you all a sense of it, but I'm going to just try and tweak the focus. Yeah, see, it's just not going to probably work for everyone to really get a real sense of these, but we can walk around. You can just walk around and yeah.
Okay, so these are the weeks after Easter. And this is a cross which is actually well known because there are 4 verses of light in the calendar of the soul. 2 verses that say in the light, and 2 verses that belong with the words the light. And that is the 5th cross. There it is over there. And now we progress to what we just spoke about, which is ascension. And after ascension, of course, Whitsun. And we see echoed or mirrored around Whitsun. Do not lose yourself, and here lose yourself in order to find yourself. Verse 9. To lose myself into the light is the command of spirit vision. And strongly prescient speaks, lose yourself to find. Now we go from Whitsun into St. John's. Verse 12 is St. John's verse. Will be.
Is that where you have your hand?
Very soon, when we talk about Caspar Hauser. And after St. John's, it's the week after St. John's, we go now to the end of St. John's season, and then we come to the Cross of Death again. This is the August week of inner death.
Okay.
And then when we've crossed over this Cross of Death, we come to the autumn weeks, the Michaelmas weeks. So this is the first week of Michaelmas. 12 verses of Michaelmas festival. Okay. Now we're going through Michaelmas time. Don't know how quickly you want to see it.
No, it's fine. We can't really see in much detail, so
Yeah.
you can, I just
Yeah.
want to give everyone a lay of the land.
Yeah. So, can I expand my soul? Is here, for instance. Now we go towards Michaelmas. Here we have the verse of death, verse 20. Only now do I feel my being. And now we can cross over here to the Michaelmas verse.
It's so hard to get this.
This wonderful verse that has in German 24 S's in it. Sich selbst erschaffend stets, wird Seelensein sich selbst gewahr. So I've tried to put as many S's into the English as possible, and I have 26 S's in the English. Constant self-creation. Now, here's the Michaelmas verse. O nature, your motherly being. And now, after Michaelmas, I spoke about this verse. And this is the last verse of Michaelmas. I feel fruition of my own forces, giving me more strongly into the world. So I now begin to take my summer experience into the world. And verse 33 is then the crossing over from Michaelmas to Advent, to Christmas, the outer death of nature. And now we are into Advent time. And here's the Christmas verse. I can feel as if freed from enchantment, spirit child within the womb of soul. And these are the verses of Christmas time still. Until the last week of Christmas, which is, of course, Candlemas. And then comes the cross, the cross of death again for verse 46. Then we see the beasts of the threshold coming towards me in the time before Easter, because of course this is Passion. The word, it threatens to benumb the inborn forces of the soul. And now we continue the fourth verse of the light. In the light, which from world heights would flow mightily to the soul. And I love this verse particularly. It happens to be the birthday of Rudolf Steiner. So, and now these are the weeks of Passiontide, the weeks before Easter. And here, let me show you this one a little more closely, because this is.
Oh, wait, no, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, now the light, okay, watch out for the light from above reflecting in it.
Okay, better?
Yeah.
Okay, this is verse 52, Holy Week. The opposite to Easter, but belonging together. When from the depths of soul the spirit turns to the life of worlds, and beauty wells from widths of space. Then from farthest heavens life force flows into human form, uniting by its mighty strength, spirit essence with human life. It is really a culmination of the whole process in this verse 52.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We're gonna stop the recording now. Yeah, we hope you join us tomorrow evening and Sunday afternoon at 4. And then next weekend, Friday and Saturday night at 7.